The courthouse in Madison County stood tall, its stone pillars a reminder of both history and justice. On that particular morning, its steps were crowded with reporters, photographers, and curious onlookers. The case being tried had become the talk of the town, a break-in that escalated into violence, leaving scars both physical and emotional. The defendant, a man with connections to law enforcement, had pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against him was shaky. Many wondered if justice would truly be served. Inside, the air was heavy with anticipation, as though everyone sensed something unusual was about to happen. Inside Courtroom 3B, the jury shuffled into their seats, whispering to one another. Before falling silent, the judge, a stern yet fair man known for his booming voice, sat poised with his gavel, ready to begin the day's proceedings. Lawyers stacked their files neatly on the desks, adjusting ties and tapping pens, the small habits of those who lived in the rhythm of trials. Police officers lined the back wall, their uniforms sharp, their expressions unreadable. No one noticed. The door opening quietly near the rear. A young woman slipped in, her hand clutching that of her daughter. She looked nervous, her eyes scanning the room as though questioning if she even belonged there. The child at her side was no more than 3 years old, her hair tied into 2 small pigtails, her dress wrinkled from the ride over. She clutched a stuffed bear in one hand, her tiny shoes making faint taps on the floor. Whispers immediately began among the spectators. What was a child doing here? Surely not to testify. The mother found a seat at the very back, pulling the girl onto her lap to keep her settled. The little one's wide eyes wandered across the room, taking in the strangers, the high ceiling, the polished wooden benches. Everything must have seemed impossibly large to her. Yet, for all her youth, there was a quiet seriousness in her face, as if she sensed this was no ordinary outing with her mother. The bailiff's voice called the court to order. All rose as the judge entered, robe swishing, his presence commanding. Immediate silence. The trial resumed with its usual formality. Witness lists, motions from both sides, objections raised and sustained. It felt routine, though beneath the surface, tension bubbled. Everyone knew the case hinged on testimony and small details. A single inconsistency could tilt the scales toward acquittal. Then the door opened again. This time, all heads turned. A German shepherd padded in, his dark coat gleaming, his leash held firmly by his handler in uniform. The dog walked with calm authority, nails clicking against the tile floor, head held high as though he, too, understood the weight of the proceedings. He was the department's pride, a police canine trained to detect drugs, weapons, and, when necessary, protect his partner. The handler guided him confidently, their steps in sync, a practiced pair. Murmurs spread across the courtroom. It wasn't unusual for a police dog to make an appearance in a case involving evidence collection, but his presence always drew attention. Some jurors smiled faintly. Others watched with curiosity. The German shepherd exuded strength and discipline, the very embodiment of law enforcement. But at the back of the room, the little girl froze. Her small fingers stopped fidgeting with the stuffed bear. Her gaze locked onto the dog, unblinking, as if she had seen a ghost. Her breathing quickened, and she pressed herself against her mother, who leaned down, whispering gently, "It's just a police dog, honey. Don't be scared." But the child didn't answer. Instead, her lips parted slightly, and her eyes never left the animal striding toward the front. The handler and dog reached their place near the witness stand. The judge nodded, acknowledging them, before turning back to the lawyers. It should have been a routine moment, barely worth noting. Yet the atmosphere shifted, charged with an unseen tension. From the back row came a sound so small, yet so piercing, that it silenced the entire courtroom. "That's him." The Words were spoken in the clear, high voice of a 3-year-old. Every head turned. Her mother gasped, quickly shushing her daughter, but it was too late. The room had heard. The girl lifted her tiny finger and pointed directly at the German shepherd. For a long moment, silence reigned. Even the dog seemed to pause, his ears flicking back as though aware of being singled out. The handler's grip on the leash tightened, his expression flickering between surprise and discomfort. The judge's gavel came down hard, demanding order, but whispers could not be contained. Jurors leaned forward, exchanging bewildered looks. The defense attorney frowned, scribbling notes furiously. The prosecutor's eyes narrowed, studying the child with sudden interest. The mother flushed red, embarrassed, and tried to pull her daughter onto her lap again. "Sweetheart, no, you're mistaken," she whispered frantically. But the little girl shook her head firmly, her gaze still fixed on the dog. "That's him," she repeated, louder this time, her small voice echoing off the courtroom walls. It was a surreal sight. A toddler, speaking with the kind of certainty that cut through the practiced arguments of seasoned lawyers. She did not look playful or confused. She looked serious, as though she understood more than anyone expected. The handler forced a laugh, tugging lightly on the leash. "She's just a kid," he muttered under his breath, though his face betrayed unease. The judge leaned forward. "Bailiff, ensure order is maintained." Then, with a thoughtful glance at the little girl, he added, "This may require clarification." Her mother shook her head quickly. "Your Honor, she's only 3. She doesn't know what she's saying." But the judge was not so easily convinced. He had presided over countless cases, heard countless testimonies, and he knew when something unusual demanded attention. "Nevertheless," he said firmly, "the child has spoken. It is not our place to dismiss words so quickly, not when they are said with such conviction." Gasps rippled again through the crowd. The prosecutor stood, seizing the moment. "Your Honor, with permission, I'd like to ask the child a few simple questions." The mother protested softly, torn between protecting her daughter and realizing the seriousness of the situation. Finally, with a nod from the judge, the little girl was carried to the witness stand. She sat on the high chair, legs dangling, her stuffed bear clutched tightly in her hand. Her big eyes roamed the room, before settling once more on the German shepherd. She didn't fidget, didn't look confused. She looked ready. The prosecutor knelt down, so his face was level with hers. His tone was gentle, careful not to frighten. "Sweetheart, can you tell us what you mean when you said, 'That's him'?" The child's lips curved downward, and she whispered, "I saw him." The entire courtroom held its breath. Her mother's hands trembled. The handler stiffened, his jaw tightening. The German shepherd whined softly, shifting uneasily at his side. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowed in fascination. And in that instant, everyone realized this was no ordinary witness. This was the beginning of something that would change the course of the entire trial. The silence that followed the little girl's words was unlike anything the courtroom had experienced before. Courtrooms are normally filled with noise, the shuffle of papers, coughs from jurors, whispered objections between attorneys, the gavel striking to restore order. But now, all of it fell away. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above, and the steady ticking of the courtroom clock. A 3-year-old child had just broken through the carefully rehearsed structure of law and procedure with 3 simple words. "That's him." The jurors looked around, uncertain if they'd heard correctly. The defense attorney, a tall man with graying hair and sharp eyes, leaned forward, his pen tapping nervously against his notepad. The prosecutor froze mid-step, his gaze darting between the child and the German shepherd. The judge, always stoic, shifted slightly in his chair, his stern eyes narrowing. At the front, the canine stood tall beside his handler. The German Shepherd was no ordinary animal, trained, disciplined, and loyal to commands. But even he seemed to sense the tension. His ears twitched, his tail swished slowly, and his dark eyes flicked toward the child who pointed at him. It was as though he understood the weight of her words. The handler's reaction, however, was anything but calm. His jaw clenched, and he tugged the leash tighter, muttering something under his breath. For the first time, sweat dotted his forehead. He tried to mask it with a chuckle, glancing nervously at the jury. "Kids say the darndest things," he said with forced lightness. "She's probably just fascinated by the dog. Happens all the time." But no one laughed. The little girl's mother, her cheeks burning with embarrassment, pulled her daughter onto her lap and whispered frantically, "Sweetheart, stop it. You don't know what you're saying." She smoothed the child's hair, hoping to quiet her. But the girl wriggled free, shaking her head firmly. Her voice, though soft, carried with crystal clarity across the hushed room. "That's him," she repeated, pointing at the dog. Her wide eyes were unblinking, her tiny finger unwavering. The judge struck his gavel sharply. Bang! Bang! The sound echoed. "Order in the court," he commanded, his voice booming. But even his authority could not erase the weight of what had just happened. This was no idle outburst from a restless child. This was something else entirely. The prosecutor rose slowly, his legal instincts sharpening. He had handled dozens of cases, but never had a toddler change the trajectory of a trial so suddenly. With careful steps, he approached the girl and crouched to her level. He spoke in a voice as gentle as one might use at story time. "Hi there," he said kindly. "What's your name?" The child clutched her stuffed bear closer. Her eyes flicked to her mother, who nodded reluctantly, urging her to answer. "Emily," the girl whispered. "Well, Emily," the prosecutor continued softly, "when you said, 'That's him,' what did you mean?" Emily's eyes shifted back to the German Shepherd. Her lips pressed together, as though recalling a memory too big for someone so small. Then she spoke, her words slow but certain. "I saw him," she said. The collective intake of breath from the courtroom was deafening. Even the court reporter, usually robotic in her transcription, paused mid-stroke, her fingers hovering over the keys. The defense attorney shot to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor," he barked, his voice loud and desperate. "This is absurd. She's a toddler. Children at that age can't distinguish fact from fantasy. Allowing this kind of testimony is irresponsible." The judge lifted a hand for silence, but did not immediately agree. His eyes were fixed on Emily, studying her. He had presided over countless witnesses, seen lies dressed as truth, and truth dismissed as nonsense. But something in the child's tone, the conviction, the steadiness, struck him. "Overruled," the judge said firmly. "Proceed, but tread carefully." The prosecutor nodded, glancing briefly at the jury, who were now leaning forward, fully invested. He returned his focus to Emily. "Emily," he said gently, "can you tell us where you saw him?" The child hesitated. She hugged her stuffed bear so tightly it seemed strained. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but the room was so still that everyone heard. "At night," she said, "when the man came." Her mother gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. The prosecutor leaned in closer, his heart pounding. "Do you mean the night of the break-in?" Emily nodded slowly. The defense attorney erupted again, his voice rising in panic. "Your Honor, I must object again. This is hearsay. This is... Sit down, counselor," the judge snapped, striking his gavel. "You'll have your turn." The handler shifted uncomfortably, sweat now rolling down his temples. His once proud posture had wilted, his hand gripping the leash so tightly his knuckles turned white. The German shepherd stood quietly, but his eyes never left the little girl. The prosecutor pressed on, his tone cautious but firm. "Emily, can you tell us more about what you saw?" The child's brow furrowed, the way children do when recalling something important. She nodded. "I was hiding," she said softly. "Under the table? Mommy told me to be quiet. I saw the man. And the dog, this dog." She lifted her finger again, pointing directly at the K9. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. The jurors exchanged stunned looks. The judge struck his gavel again, demanding silence. The prosecutor's eyes widened. "You're sure, Emily? You saw this dog?" "Yes," she said simply. "This one, with the shiny collar." Her words sent a chill through the courtroom. How could a 3-year-old describe the collar with such clarity? The detail was too precise, too anchored in reality to be dismissed as childish imagination. The defense attorney scrambled, his face flushed. "This is preposterous. A toddler's testimony has no credibility. She's confused, manipulated by her mother, perhaps even coached by the prosecution." I moved to strike. Every word. But the judge wasn't convinced. He leaned back in his chair, tapping his gavel lightly against the bench as he studied the child. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "truth comes from unexpected places. I will not strike it. We'll continue." The defense attorney sank into his seat, his face stormy with frustration. Meanwhile, the handler's composure cracked further. His jaw worked as though grinding his teeth. His eyes darted nervously toward the prosecutor, then to the jury, then finally down at the dog at his side. The German shepherd let out a low whine, barely audible, shifting uneasily on his paws. It was a sound so soft, so filled with something almost human, that it only deepened the sense that the courtroom was on the verge of something extraordinary. The judge finally turned his gaze toward the handler. "Officer Daniels," he said, his tone cutting through the thick tension. "Your dog has been identified by a witness, albeit a very young one, as being present during the crime in question. Do you have anything to say?" The handler stammered. "Your Honor, with all due respect, this is nonsense. My dog was with me, and we were off duty at home that night. There is no way she could have seen him." But even as he spoke, his voice trembled. And in the eyes of the jury, that tremor spoke volumes. The courtroom, once governed by routine and order, had been shaken to its core by the unwavering finger of a child. 3 small words had disrupted everything. And as Emily sat back down in her mother's lap, calm and unshaken, the question lingered in every mind. Could it be true? Had a toddler just exposed a truth that no one else dared to see? The courtroom remained taut with tension. Every person in that chamber, from jurors to reporters, felt the weight of a child's words. The 3-year-old Emily had already appended months of preparation by simply pointing and speaking 2 small words. "That's him." Now, the room waited in breathless anticipation as the prosecutor gently encouraged her to explain. Emily's tiny hands gripped her stuffed bear tightly. She drew a deep breath, and her small voice trembled slightly, but the conviction behind her words was unmistakable. "I saw him," she said. A shiver ran through the room. Every adult felt it, a premonition that the case would never be the same. The prosecutor crouched down to her level, keeping his voice calm and measured. "Emily, can you tell us what you mean when you say, 'I saw him'?" The little girl's big brown eyes shifted briefly to her mother, who nodded ever so slightly, as if granting her daughter permission to speak. Then Emily's gaze returned to the German shepherd and the man holding his leash. "I was hiding," Emily said, her words deliberate. "Under the table, I saw the man and the dog. This dog," she added, pointing directly at the police. "K-9, Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The jurors leaned forward in their seats, trying to reconcile the vivid image painted by a child no older than 3. The judge adjusted his glasses, his pen poised above his notepad, studying every twitch of Emily's expression. Even the seasoned lawyers, accustomed to rehearsed testimonies and scripted statements, felt their confidence falter in the face of her clarity. The defense attorney jumped to his feet. "Objection, Your Honor," he bellowed. "This is preposterous. She is a toddler. She cannot distinguish reality from imagination. She is incapable of recalling a crime accurately. I move to strike her statements entirely." The judge, however, shook his head slowly. He had seen many attempts to manipulate the courtroom, and he could sense sincerity when it appeared. "Overruled," he said firmly. "The child has spoken. We will hear her out further." Whispers filled the room again. Even the court reporter paused momentarily, pen hovering above her notepad. The gravity of the moment was tangible. Emily's mother clutched her daughter's hand tightly. "Sweetheart, be careful," she whispered, her voice trembling. Emily shook her head. "I'm telling the truth," she said softly but clearly. The prosecutor smiled gently. "That's all we need, Emily. Can you tell me exactly what you saw?" Emily thought for a moment, her little brow furrowing as she searched her memory. Then she began recounting the night in the simplest, most unfiltered way possible. "I was under the table at home. It was dark. Mommy was in the kitchen. I saw a man come through the door. He had a bag, and the dog. The dog was with him. The collar was shiny, and it looked like this one," she said, pointing again at the German Shepherd. Her words were simple, but the detail she provided, the bag, the collar, the presence of the dog, made the entire courtroom lean forward in disbelief. The jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances. The prosecution scribbled notes rapidly, trying to capture the unexpected turn the case had taken. Meanwhile, the defense attorney's face turned pale. He looked as if the ground beneath him was crumbling. "Your Honor, this is ridiculous. A child cannot possibly provide details about a criminal event. This testimony is unreliable, influenced by fear, imagination, or coaching," he shouted. The judge, however, remained impassive. His eyes were locked on Emily, studying the way her small hands gripped the bear, the precision of her words, and the unwavering certainty in her gaze. "The court recognizes the child's age," he said carefully. "However, the clarity and specificity of her statements warrant consideration. We will continue." Emily's tiny voice continued to recount the memory. "The man took something from the table. I don't know what it was. He told the dog to stay, but the dog followed him. I watched him go outside. Mommy didn't see. I hid until he left." A shiver ran through the courtroom. Every adult there understood the implications of what she had just said. Here was a child, speaking with unpolished but precise detail, describing actions no one had thought she could have witnessed. The prosecutor glanced briefly at the German Shepherd's handler, Officer Daniels, who now looked uncomfortably tense. His jaw tightened, and he shifted his weight from one foot to the other. He had been confident, certain that no child could recall events from that night. Now, the confidence was slipping. Emily's words were not rehearsed, nor were they coached. Her mother's anxiety was genuine. She had no idea her daughter would remember this or speak about it in public. The precision of the details, the bag, the shiny collar, a man's actions, created a puzzle piece that suddenly seemed to fit a larger, troubling picture. The prosecutor asked softly, "Emily, did you recognize the man?" The little girl's eyes widened slightly, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and certainty. "Yes," she said. "The bad man. With the dog." The courtroom gasped again. Even the judge's stoicism faltered for a brief moment. This was no ordinary child's outburst. This was testimony that could change everything. Officer Daniels stepped forward, attempting to regain control. Your Honor, with all due respect, the child is mistaken. This dog has been in my care at all times. There is no way she could have seen this. But Emily's mother shook her head slowly. She knew her daughter's recollection was accurate. Your Honor, she said softly, she's not imagining this. She remembers what happened. The jurors whispered among themselves, sensing the dramatic shift. They had come to hear facts and arguments, but they were now witnessing the extraordinary, the words of a toddler influencing the perception of truth in a case that had stumped professionals for weeks. Emily's tiny voice rang out once more. The dog and the man, they were together. He told the dog to wait, but the dog went with him anyway. I saw everything. The prosecutor, realizing the magnitude of the testimony, asked, Emily, is there anything else you can tell us about that night? The child paused, thinking carefully. The man's shoes made a loud noise on the floor. He looked around to see if anyone was watching. Mommy didn't see. I was hiding. Each sentence was delivered with clarity and honesty. The courtroom hung on every word. The defense attorney's protests became more frantic, but even he could see that the child's statements were too precise to be dismissed entirely. The judge called for a brief recess, allowing the court to regain composure. As everyone filed out, whispers filled the hallways. Reporters jotted notes furiously. Jurors sat silently, processing what they had just heard. The weight of a 3-year-old's memory and observation had shifted the balance of perception in the room. Emily sat quietly with her mother, hugging her bear tightly. She did not understand the attention she had drawn, nor did she grasp the power of her words. But everyone around her knew. This small child had just spoken truths that adults had overlooked, details that could unravel a case built on incomplete evidence. Outside the courtroom, investigators were already preparing to re-examine the timeline and evidence. Security footage from nearby stores, neighborhood surveillance cameras, and eyewitness accounts were all about to be reviewed with the child's testimony in mind. If what she remembered was accurate, it could turn months of assumptions upside down. Inside the room, the German shepherd shifted uneasily beside Officer Daniels, as though sensing the tension. Even the trained animals seemed aware that something unprecedented was unfolding. The judge adjusted his glasses and tapped his gavel lightly. This is highly unusual, he said quietly to the clerk. We proceed with caution, but we do not disregard what has been presented. A child's testimony may be small in stature, but it is not without weight. As the recess ended and the court prepared to continue, one thing was clear. Emily's words had already begun to rewrite the story. The smallest witness in the courtroom had just spoken in a way that could challenge the understanding of truth itself. And as she held her stuffed bear tightly, looking once more at the canine at the front, everyone in the room knew this was only the beginning. The courtroom had barely regained its composure when Emily, still clutching her stuffed bear, shifted in her mother's lap. Her small frame seemed almost fragile in the vast chamber, yet the power of her words reverberated like a drumbeat through the entire room. Every person present, from jurors to attorneys to onlookers, felt the weight of what had happened. A toddler had just described, with alarming accuracy, a scene from a crime that had eluded professionals for weeks. And now, the next revelation was about to arrive. Officer Daniels, the German shepherd's handler, stood stiffly near the front, gripping the leash so tightly that his knuckles whitened. His polished uniform did nothing to conceal the tension radiating from him. For weeks, he had presented himself as calm, collected, and unshakable. But Emily's testimony had pierced through that facade. The dog, normally obedient and controlled, shifted slightly, ears flicking toward the child. Even the animal seemed to sense the gravity of the moment. The judge, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully, leaned forward. He had seen countless witnesses. Some honest, some deceitful, but rarely had a courtroom been so captivated by someone so young. "Counselor," he said to the prosecutor, "approach the bench, carefully." The prosecutor moved forward, keeping his tone gentle as he addressed Emily. "Emily, can you tell us more about what you saw?" The little girl's eyes darted nervously to her mother. Her mother nodded, offering quiet reassurance. Emily took a deep breath, gripping her bear tighter, and whispered 2 words that instantly sent a shiver through everyone present. "Bad man." The words, soft yet undeniable, seemed to hang in the air. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned back in his chair, momentarily stunned. Words from a 3-year-old had cut through months of investigation, routine procedures, and practiced deception. They carried a clarity and authority that no adult witness had yet provided. The German shepherd shifted again, almost imperceptibly, as if acknowledging the child's statement. Its ears flattened slightly, tail drooped, and the normally confident gaze seemed hesitant, flicking back and forth between Emily and Daniels. The officer's hand tightened around the leash, his jaw rigid, and for the first time, the court saw uncertainty in his eyes. The defense attorney was the first to recover, launching another rapid objection. "Your Honor, this is nonsense. A toddler cannot identify criminals, interpret events, or understand context. Her statements are unreliable and prejudicial. I demand this line of questioning stop immediately." The judge raised a hand, silencing the courtroom. "Order," he said sharply. Then, after a pause, he added, "While the defense's concerns are noted, we cannot ignore the child's testimony. It is precise, consistent, and unprompted. Proceed, but with caution." Emily's mother swallowed hard. She had tried to protect her daughter, but even she had to admit the child's memory of that night was uncanny. The clarity, the details, the conviction, it all pointed to something beyond mere imagination. She whispered softly, "It's okay, baby. Just tell the truth." Emily nodded. Her little face was set with determination. "I saw him," she said again, emphasizing the words with the tiny fingers of both hands pointing toward the canine. "And its handler." The prosecutor leaned in closer, careful to maintain a gentle tone. "Emily, can you tell us what the man was doing?" "He was taking things," she whispered. "He had a bag, and he told the dog to stay. But the dog followed him anyway. I saw him go outside. Mommy didn't see." The courtroom's atmosphere grew electric. The jurors leaned forward, notebooks forgotten, captivated by the innocence and precision of the child. The attorneys, who had spent countless hours analyzing evidence and preparing witnesses, were suddenly scrambling to interpret what a toddler could remember with startling accuracy. Officer Daniels' hand shook slightly as he gripped the leash. He had assumed no child could have witnessed that night, assumed nothing of significance could come from Emily. But now, doubt gnawed at him. He had trained the dog for years, believed in his own alibi, and yet this child's memory threatened to unravel everything. The prosecutor's eyes never left Emily's. "Emily," he said gently, "you're very brave. Can you tell us if you remember anything else about that night?" She paused, blinking rapidly. "The man's shoes, they made a loud noise. On the floor, I saw his hands. He was moving fast. The dog stayed close, even though he was told to wait." Each word seemed to tighten the tension in the courtroom. The defense attorney's protests grew louder and more frantic, but even he could sense that Emily's statements were extraordinary. These were not the random, incoherent ramblings of a toddler. These were coherent, detailed observations. The judge leaned forward, tapping his gavel lightly. "This is highly unusual," he murmured. But the clarity of the child's recollection cannot be dismissed outright. Continue. Even the journalists, who had covered countless high-profile trials, scribbled furiously. They whispered to one another, realizing they were witnessing an unprecedented moment. A toddler's testimony was driving the narrative of a criminal trial, challenging both expectations and assumptions. Emily's mother held her hands tightly over the child's, her voice barely audible. "You're okay, sweetie. Just keep telling the truth." Emily nodded once, then looked directly at the handler and the dog. "The dog knew him," she whispered. "He followed him. He's the bad man." The courtroom erupted with whispers. Officer Daniels' face paled, his composure faltering. He had believed his dog's presence could never be challenged, that his meticulous planning would never be questioned. And yet, here was a toddler, seemingly unafraid, pointing out a truth he had hoped to keep hidden. The prosecutor, sensing the magnitude of the testimony, leaned closer to Emily. "Emily, what do you think the dog was doing with the man?" "She was helping him," Emily said simply, her voice calm and unwavering. "Even though he was told to stay, he followed him anyway." It was a subtle statement, yet everyone understood its significance. The K-9 had been implicated indirectly, a silent witness, obedient but involved in a scenario that had consequences no one anticipated. The implications were monumental. The defense attorney pounded his fist on the table. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. A child cannot possibly have a grasp on criminal behavior, dog training, or any of these details. This is a travesty." The judge held up a hand. "Counselor, we will hear the child out. Her testimony, while unusual, is consistent and direct. We will allow it to continue." Emily's mother glanced around nervously. She had come to court to support her daughter, not to watch her be thrust into the center of such a complex legal situation. Yet she also recognized the truth in her child's words, the clarity in her recall. Emily turned once more to the German shepherd. Her little finger pointed firmly. "Bad man," she whispered again, louder this time, almost as though she could make the entire courtroom hear her conviction. A murmur swept through the spectators. Jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances. Even the judge shifted in his chair. Emily's words, delivered with the simplicity and sincerity only a child could muster, had already begun to crack the carefully constructed facade of Officer Daniels. The handler shifted, his hand tightening again on the leash. He had no words left, only the growing realization that the courtroom now viewed him and his dog differently. The K-9, usually calm and obedient, now seemed tense, ears flicking toward Emily repeatedly, as if acknowledging her insight. The prosecutor, maintaining a gentle and encouraging demeanor, whispered, "Thank you, Emily. You've been very brave. That's all for now." Emily settled back into her mother's lap, clutching her bear. But the impact of her words lingered in every corner of the room. Attorneys whispered hurriedly, jurors leaned forward, and even the stenographer paused momentarily to process the events. The judge tapped his gavel one last time. "We will take a brief recess. When we resume, we will examine the implications of this testimony and review evidence in light of it. Court is adjourned for 20 minutes. As the courtroom emptied slightly, whispers of disbelief and intrigue echoed down the corridors. Emily had spoken 2 words, "bad man," and in doing so, had shifted the course of a trial that had once seemed straightforward. Outside the courtroom, investigators began to discuss reviewing surveillance footage again, now with the details Emily had provided in mind. Security cameras from nearby businesses could now be cross-referenced with the child's recollection. Witnesses might be re-interviewed. The prosecutor's office began making rapid plans. Inside the courtroom, Officer Daniels adjusted the leash nervously. His dog, normally calm and obedient, seemed unsettled. Emily's simple observation had cast doubt where he had believed none existed. And so the whisper of a child, the quiet declaration of bad man, had sent ripples of tension, doubt, and curiosity through an entire courtroom. It was clear to everyone present, this was no ordinary testimony. A child's words had shaken an adult world built on procedure, evidence, and assumption. The smallest witness had become the most powerful voice in the room. And as Emily hugged her bear, unaware of the storm she had created, every adult in the courtroom understood nothing would ever be the same. The 20-minute recess felt like an eternity to everyone in the courtroom. Outside, whispers spread rapidly. Reporters crowded near the courthouse doors, their notebooks full of hurried notes. They spoke in hushed tones about the extraordinary developments, how a 3-year-old child had just pointed out a police canine and uttered the words "bad man," changing the trajectory of an already high-profile case. Social media had begun to buzz even before court resumed. Videos captured by smartphone cameras circulated, showing the little girl's unwavering finger pointing at the dog. People across the county were stunned. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had transformed. The judge, once stoic and methodical, now had a furrowed brow. The K-9 handler, Officer Daniels, had retreated to the edge of the room, glancing nervously at the jurors and the German shepherd at his side. The dog, trained to obedience and composure, shifted uneasily, glancing from the handler to the little girl and back again. Even the courtroom's air seemed charged with expectation, as if the very walls understood that something monumental was about to unfold. The prosecutor, seizing the moment, motioned for a brief consultation with the court. "Clerk, Your Honor," he said quietly, "we'd like permission to review additional evidence immediately, considering the child's testimony. Surveillance footage, neighborhood security, anything that might corroborate her account." The judge nodded thoughtfully. "Granted. But ensure this does not unduly delay the proceedings. Let's proceed with discretion." Detectives already stationed nearby scrambled to prepare the footage. Their hands shook with anticipation, aware that months of careful investigation were about to intersect with a 3-year-old's memory. As they worked, Emily sat calmly with her mother, clutching her bear. She had no idea of the storm she had unleashed, only that she had told the truth about what she had seen that night. Minutes later, the investigators returned, bringing with them grainy video footage from a convenience store across the street from the break-in site. The prosecutor called the courtroom to attention, and the feed was projected onto the large monitor for all to see. At first, the footage seemed inconclusive, dark, grainy, and blurred by the nighttime lighting. Shadows moved across the screen, indistinct shapes passing through the frame. Then, slowly, as the video advanced frame by frame, a figure appeared. A man, moving cautiously, carried a small bag. Beside him, a dog padded quietly, obediently, tail low but ears flicked alert. The angle was poor, but enough detail emerged to match Emily's description. The dog's shiny collar glimmered in the dim light. The man's shoes made the same distinctive noise Emily had described, tapping sharply against the pavement as he hurried. Gasps erupted across the courtroom. Jurors whispered frantically to one another. The judge leaned forward in disbelief. Officer Daniel's face drained of color. Even the German shepherd shifted uneasily, as though recognizing the gravity of the moment. The prosecutor's voice, calm but steady, addressed the court. "Your Honor, this footage appears to corroborate the child's testimony. The details she described, the bag, the shoes, the dog with the shiny collar, match what we see here." The defense attorney jumped to his feet, red-faced and furious. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. Grainy nighttime footage is not proof. Any resemblance to my client is coincidental. This is circumstantial at best." The judge tapped his gavel, but remained silent for a moment, his eyes scanning the monitor and then resting on Emily. "We will allow this evidence to be examined," he said finally, "but arguments about its interpretation will follow." Emily's mother squeezed her daughter's hand tightly. "You were right, baby," she whispered softly. "You remembered everything." Emily looked up at her mother and nodded slightly, hugging her bear closer. She was unaware that her memory had just provided what months of investigation could not. Her observations, so simple and direct, had now become the cornerstone of evidence. The jurors leaned forward in their seats, trying to absorb every detail. Even the most skeptical among them found it difficult to dismiss the precision of a 3-year-old's account. The defense attorney muttered, pacing back and forth, his frustration palpable. Officer Daniels, for the first time, avoided eye contact with the jury. His confident composure had been shattered by Emily's testimony. The footage now corroborated details he had assumed no one, especially a child, could ever recall. "They," prosecutor continued carefully, guiding the court through the video, "notice the dog's behavior," he pointed out. "Even when told to stay, it follows the man. This aligns with the child's observation that the dog was present and active in ways that indicate knowledge of the situation." The courtroom fell silent as the video played again, this time in slow motion. Every movement of the dog and the man seemed deliberate, almost choreographed. Emily had described it all without hesitation. The bag, the instructions, the obedience, the hesitation. She had seen the details no adult had recorded in writing. No camera had perfectly captured. Yet her memory was spot on. The defense attorney's protests grew louder, but they fell on deaf ears. The evidence, the child's testimony, and the video now formed a chain difficult to break. The jurors whispered amongst themselves, eyes fixed on Emily, who sat quietly, her innocence a stark contrast to the weight of her words. The judge called for another brief recess to allow the attorneys to review the footage. During the pause, whispers swept through the gallery. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cell phones buzzed with updates. Social media exploded with speculation. Toddler identifies police dog at crime scene. 3-year-old helps solve high-profile break-in. The story was spreading like wildfire. When the courtroom reconvened, the prosecutor asked the detective team to detail the findings from their rapid review of additional security footage in the surrounding neighborhood. Cameras from a nearby gas station, a convenience store, and even a residential security system had captured fragments of the night in question. Each clip, pieced together, revealed the man and the dog moving cautiously along the streets. Every movement Emily had described, from the distinctive tapping of the shoes to the dog's obedience and hesitation, matched the child's memory. The courtroom collectively held its breath. Jurors exchanged glances that spoke volumes. They were witnessing something extraordinary. Even the seasoned judge allowed a faint nod of acknowledgement. Officer Daniels, now pale and visibly sweating, remained frozen beside his dog. The German shepherd, unusually restless, shifted its weight, ears flicking toward Emily, then back to Daniels. Every instinct in the room suggested that the truth, as observed by a child, was more accurate than anyone had dared to believe. The prosecutor addressed the court. "Your Honor, we now have multiple sources of corroborating evidence that align with the child's testimony. The video, the security footage, and her precise observations all indicate that the events she described were factual and credible. This is a rare instance where a young witness has provided critical insight." The defense attorney, in desperation, attempted to object again. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. A toddler cannot be relied upon as a credible witness." The judge shook his head. Overruled. The court acknowledges the unusual circumstances, but will consider the testimony in its entirety. The evidence must be weighed carefully. As the session continued, Emily remained calm, her small hands clutching her bear. She had done nothing extraordinary. She had simply spoken the truth. Yet the ripple effect of her words had reshaped the trial. Investigators whispered among themselves, preparing to cross-reference every detail. The child's testimony had provided a roadmap, highlighting elements that had been previously overlooked. From security footage to eyewitness accounts, every piece of evidence now seemed to align with Emily's recollection. By the end of the day, it was undeniable. A 3-year-old child had influenced a criminal investigation in ways that no adult could have anticipated. She had pointed out a police dog, recalled a sequence of events with startling accuracy, and provided the spark that would illuminate the truth hidden in shadows. And as the courtroom emptied, Emily remained in her mother's arms, unaware of the magnitude of her contribution. Outside, the media swarmed, eager to capture every detail of the astonishing case. Inside, Officer Daniels and his dog prepared to face questions that no one had imagined possible just hours earlier. The child's observation, simple, direct, and unwavering, had become the key to unraveling the mystery. A toddler's courage and clarity had proven that truth could come from the smallest voices, and that justice sometimes relies on the most unexpected witnesses. The courtroom had descended into a strange quiet. Everyone, jurors, attorneys, spectators, and even the reporters, waited for the next move, unsure what to expect. A 3-year-old child had already changed the course of the trial with her precise memory. Security footage corroborated her statements. And yet, at the center of it all, stood the German Shepherd, trained and disciplined, whose subtle movements seemed to speak volumes. Emily sat on her mother's lap, clutching her bear. Her eyes were bright and focused, scanning the front of the courtroom, as if she could see more than just the humans around her. Her small finger pointed repeatedly at the dog, almost insistently. It was a gesture so simple, yet it carried an unexpected gravity. Officer Daniels shifted uncomfortably, holding the leash so tightly that his knuckles turned white. He had trained the dog for years, instilled obedience and discipline, and yet something was different. The canine, normally unflinching in the presence of authority, now hesitated. Its ears flicked toward Emily, its eyes locked on the child, and its tail drooped slightly. The change was subtle but unmistakable. Everyone noticed. The prosecutor leaned forward, voice calm but urgent. "Your Honor, it appears the dog is reacting to the child's presence. We may be witnessing a behavioral cue that aligns with her testimony. It is highly unusual for a canine trained for obedience to display hesitation in this context." The defense attorney's face grew pale. "Objection," he shouted. "This is absurd. The dog is trained for controlled behavior. Its hesitation is meaningless, a random reaction at best." The judge lifted his hand. "Overruled," he said firmly. "We will observe and record the behavior. All parties are to remain calm and allow the proceedings to continue." Emily's mother adjusted her daughter on her lap. "It's okay, sweetheart. Just be brave," she whispered softly. Emily nodded, her tiny face determined. She didn't fully understand why the dog's reaction mattered, only that she had seen the truth and was pointing it out. The prosecutor spoke gently to the child. "Emily, can you tell the court what you think the dog is doing?" Emily tilted her head slightly, thinking. "The dog knows him," she said softly. "He's following the man, even though he shouldn't. He's helping him." The words hung in the air. A 3-year-old's simple observation suddenly carried weight beyond imagination. The German Shepherd's subtle hesitation seemed to echo her statement. The jury leaned forward, some whispering to one another, clearly grappling with the implications. Officer Daniels tried to regain control. "Sit," he commanded sharply. The dog obeyed, But the hesitation lingered. Its body was stiff, movements measured, as though uncertainty had replaced complete obedience. For years, Daniels had believed that his training was flawless. Now, a child's testimony and the dog's reaction combined to undermine everything he had taken for granted. The judge struck his gavel lightly. The court observes that the dog is showing unusual behavior in the presence of the witness. This observation will be noted as part of the proceedings. The prosecutor carefully guided the court's attention to the canine's reaction. "Notice," he said softly, "the hesitation, the ears flicking, the tail drooping. These are subtle indicators of recognition, alignment with prior events. This is consistent with the child's statement that the dog was present during the crime and followed the man despite instructions." The jurors shifted uneasily in their seats. Even experienced trial attendees were unnerved. Never before had they seen a witness so young influence the interpretation of a trained police dog's behavior. The defense attorney's protests grew more frantic, but his arguments seemed increasingly hollow. "This is speculation. You cannot attribute human understanding to a dog's behavior. It's meaningless." The judge raised a hand. "Counselor, the court acknowledges your objection, but observations of animal behavior in relation to witness statements may be considered. Proceed carefully." Emily, clutching her bear, pointed again at the dog. "He's helping the man. He knows him," she said, her small voice steady despite the attention. The courtroom gasped. Some jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances, clearly disturbed by the precision and certainty of her words. The canine's subtle movements, previously invisible to the untrained eye, now seemed to confirm what the child had said. The pieces were beginning to align: the testimony, the video footage, and now the dog's behavior. The prosecutor motioned for a pause, consulting with the investigators. "Your Honor, we would like to bring in an animal behavior expert to analyze the canine's reaction. It could provide significant insight into the dog's awareness of events." Described by the witness, the judge nodded. "Granted. Bring the expert forward." Let the record reflect that the court recognizes the unusual circumstances surrounding this testimony. Emily's mother whispered in her ear, "You're doing great, baby. Just stay calm." Emily nodded again, her eyes still fixed on the K-9. She didn't fully understand the expert's role, only that she had seen something important. Minutes later, the animal behaviorist entered the courtroom. A tall woman with calm eyes and a confident demeanor, she approached the K-9 and began a careful, methodical observation. She noted the dog's posture, movements, ear positions, and tail. Her pen moved quickly across her notebook as she recorded every micro-expression. "This dog," she said finally, addressing the court, "is displaying hesitation behaviors indicative of recognition and association." In other words, the K-9 remembers the individual and the events described. It is highly unusual for a trained dog to exhibit this level of discernment without prior exposure. The child's observation appears to be consistent with the dog's behavioral cues. The courtroom fell silent. Even the defense attorney struggled to find words. Officer Daniels' face had lost all color. He had trained the dog for obedience, yet the animal's behavior suggested memory, recognition, and alignment with the child's testimony. The prosecutor turned to the jury. "You have seen the footage, heard the child, and observed the dog's behavior under expert analysis. All of these elements together support the reliability of the witness's account. A toddler has provided critical insight that adults had overlooked." The jurors leaned forward, captivated. The convergence of child memory, video evidence, and canine behavior was unprecedented. They scribbled notes, whispered among themselves, and struggled to reconcile the extraordinary sequence unfolding before them. The defense attorney desperate to regain control, attempted one final objection. Your Honor, this is entirely circumstantial. A child's testimony, no matter how specific, combined with animal behavior, is insufficient for legal proceedings. I insist on striking all observations regarding the dog. The judge, calm and deliberate, shook his head, overruled. The court recognizes the unusual circumstances, but the testimony and observations remain relevant. Proceed with caution. Emily, unaware of the legal arguments raging around her, adjusted her hold on her bear and whispered, "He knows the man. He helps him." The canine shifted again, its subtle hesitation, now unmistakable. It remained by Officer Daniel's side, but kept glancing at Emily, ears flicking, tail low. Its behavior seemed to echo her words, a living confirmation of the events she had observed. The courtroom absorbed the moment in stunned silence. Months of investigation, preparation, and argument had led to this single, extraordinary convergence. A child's memory, video corroboration, and animal behavior aligning perfectly. Even the judge, seasoned and resolute, allowed a faint nod of acknowledgement. This was unprecedented. A toddler's observations had guided the course of the trial and revealed truths that had eluded professionals. Outside, news reporters jotted down every detail. Social media buzzed with the story of the child who had identified the dog's behavior as part of the crime. Authorities quietly prepared for further investigation, cross-referencing Emily's account with all available evidence. Inside, Officer Daniels tightened his grip on the leash, understanding, perhaps for the first time, that the events of that night were now documented in ways he could not control. The canine, trained to obey, had hesitated, a silent acknowledgement of Emily's words. And Emily, small and unassuming, hugged her bear tightly, unaware of the extraordinary impact she had just made. The courtroom had witnessed something remarkable, the smallest witness influencing the course of justice through clarity, courage, and observation. The trial, once routine, had become a theater of the unexpected. And everyone, judge, jury, attorneys, and spectators alike, knew that nothing would ever be the same. The courtroom was thick with anticipation. Every person present, jurors, attorneys, spectators, even the German shepherd, seemed suspended in a moment that defied expectation. Months of evidence, witness statements, and rehearsed testimony had culminated in something extraordinary. A 3-year-old child whose observations had aligned perfectly with both video footage and the subtle behavior of a trained police dog. Emily sat quietly in her mother's lap, her small hands gripping her bear tightly. She looked around at the room, full of adults, with a mixture of curiosity and calm focus. To her, it was simply another moment of telling the truth about what she had seen. But for everyone else, her presence was electrifying. The prosecutor, sensing the critical juncture of the case, leaned forward. "Your Honor," he said, his voice steady, "we have now reviewed all additional evidence, including neighborhood security footage and detailed canine behavioral analysis. Everything corroborates the child's testimony. We believe it is now time to ask her to identify specific details that could lead to a breakthrough in this case." The defense attorney stood abruptly, red-faced. "Objection. This is outrageous. A 3-year-old cannot possibly provide details that hold legal weight. This is highly prejudicial and speculative." The judge raised a hand, silencing the courtroom. Overruled. The court will proceed cautiously. The witness has already provided substantial corroboration. Continue. Emily's mother whispered, "Stay calm, baby. Just tell the truth." Emily nodded, her eyes shifting to the German shepherd at the front of the courtroom. The prosecutor smiled gently. "Emily, do you remember what the man had with him?" The little girl thought for a moment. "A bag," she said clearly. "He carried it close, The dog followed. He told the dog to stay, but the dog went anyway. He went outside. Mommy didn't see. The courtroom was silent, hanging on her words. The jurors leaned forward, absorbing every detail. Even the stenographer paused momentarily, pen poised above the notepad, recording this unprecedented testimony. The prosecutor guided the questioning carefully. Emily, can you tell us what the man looked like? Emily pointed, her small finger trembling slightly. Tall, shoes make a loud sound. Hands move fast. Face. I didn't see it well. But he's the bad man. The German Shepherd shifted its stance again. Low growl rumbling in its throat, subtle but unmistakable. The canine's instincts seemed to echo Emily's statement: recognition, caution, and alignment with memory. The jurors, now fully aware of the dog's reactions, exchanged glances that conveyed shock and incredulity. Officer Daniels tried to maintain composure. He cleared his throat and tightened his grip on the leash. He's just a dog, he muttered, mostly to himself. This is meaningless. The judge, however, allowed the prosecutor to continue. Emily, can you tell us where the man went? The child's brow furrowed. Outside, she said simply. He went to the street. The dog went with him. Mommy didn't see. The prosecutor motioned to the investigator, who had been reviewing the neighborhood footage. Could you please confirm? The investigator nodded and connected another feed to the courtroom monitor. Grainy footage from a nearby residential camera displayed a figure moving down the street, carrying a bag. Beside the figure, a dog, unmistakably the same canine, followed closely. The distinctive tapping of the shoes matched Emily's description. Gasps swept through the courtroom. Jurors whispered to one another, trying to reconcile what they had just witnessed. The child's account and the footage aligned with such precision that doubt became nearly impossible. The defense attorney's protests grew frantic. This is circumstantial at best. A child's memory, no matter how detailed, cannot outweigh months of investigation and testimony. The judge held up a hand, firm and resolute. Counselor, the court recognizes your objection. However, the court also recognizes the unprecedented alignment of testimony, evidence, and animal behavior. Proceed accordingly. Emily's mother held her hand tightly, whispering, You're so brave, baby. Emily adjusted her hold on her bear, then whispered again, pointing at the German Shepherd, He's helping the man. He remembers him. He went with him. The jurors leaned forward, captivated. Even seasoned attorneys in the room struggled to reconcile the extraordinary nature of what they were witnessing. Months of investigation had been overtaken by the calm precision of a toddler's memory. The prosecutor, recognizing the moment, asked carefully, Emily, can you tell us what the man did with the bag? She thought for a moment, her lips pursed. He hid it. Behind the bushes, a dog stayed near. He checked around. Mommy didn't see. The courtroom erupted into whispers. Security footage now showed a vague outline of a figure bending near. A bush, the dog remaining close. Though shadows obscured the man's face, Emily's recollection matched perfectly. The judge called for calm. We will proceed methodically. Let the record reflect the witness's consistent and detailed testimony. The prosecutor nodded. Thank you, Emily. You've been very brave. Can you tell us anything else that might help? Emily looked around, scanning the room carefully. Then she said softly, He looked scared. The dog followed him. He whispered. To the dog, Mommy didn't see. I hid. The German Shepherd's low growl echoed her words subtly, ears flicked forward, eyes locked on the child. The canine's behavior was unmistakable. Recognition, loyalty, and alignment with the events described. Officer Daniels swallowed hard. He had trained the dog for obedience, But this reaction suggested memory and awareness beyond what he had anticipated. He could no longer dismiss the child's observations. The prosecutor motioned to the investigators. "Your Honor, given the child's testimony, her recollection of events, and the corroborating video and behavioral evidence, we request permission to proceed to examine the specific location where the bag was allegedly hidden." The judge considered, then nodded. "Granted. All parties will observe the child's identification of the location under controlled supervision. Ensure the canine is managed appropriately." Outside the courtroom, police officers quietly prepared to escort Emily to a nearby controlled site, the very bush she had described. Every step was taken with caution, ensuring her safety and comfort. As Emily approached the area, she pointed firmly. "Here," she whispered, tiny finger extended. "He hid it here." The dog stayed close. The officers carefully searched the area. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes. Then one of them reached under the bushes and found the bag. A collective gasp swept through the assembled adults. The bag, hidden exactly where Emily had described, contained items stolen during the break-in. Every adult present realized the magnitude of what had just occurred. The prosecutor smiled gently at Emily. "You were right, Emily. You remembered everything. Thank you." Emily simply hugged her bear, unaware of the extraordinary attention she had drawn. She had told the truth, and in doing so, she had guided the authorities to critical evidence. The courtroom erupted in a mixture of astonishment and quiet admiration. Even the defense attorney looked stunned, realizing that months of strategy had been overshadowed by a toddler's courage, clarity, and memory. The judge adjusted his glasses, pen poised above his notepad. The court acknowledges the significance of this identification. The testimony of this young witness has proven invaluable. The evidence recovered corresponds directly with her recollection. Officer Daniels, standing beside the German Shepherd, let out a slow breath. His dog's obedience had been unquestionable, yet its subtle hesitation had aligned perfectly with Emily's observations. The trained canine, once thought incapable of memory recall in this context, had confirmed the child's account. Journalists scribbled furiously. Social media buzzed with the story. 3-year-old girl leads police to stolen evidence. Toddler's memory uncovers break-in mystery. News crews outside the courthouse tried to interview the adults. But everyone's focus remained on Emily, the tiny witness whose words had shifted the entire investigation. The prosecutor addressed the court one final time for the day. This case demonstrates that even the smallest voice can illuminate the truth. The witness's testimony, the video evidence, and the dog's behavior collectively provide a coherent and verifiable account of the events in question. Emily hugged her bear and looked up at her mother. She had no idea of the whirlwind she had just set in motion. She only knew that she had spoken the truth. And as the courtroom settled into a stunned silence, one thing was clear. Emily had provided the breakthrough no adult had anticipated. A toddler's courage, clarity, and observation had reshaped the course of justice. The trial, once routine, now stood on the edge of revelation. And the smallest witness had proven that truth often comes in the most unexpected forms. The courtroom was charged with an energy that no one could ignore. The bag had been found exactly where Emily had indicated, its contents confirming stolen property from the break-in case. The jurors sat in stunned silence, their eyes flicking from the recovered evidence to the little girl who had led the authorities straight to it. A 3-year-old child, clutching a stuffed bear, had shifted the entire course of a complex criminal trial with her simple words and precise memory. Emily's mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "You did it, baby. You were so brave." Emily blinked up at her mother, a little puzzled. "I just told the truth," she said softly. Her voice was calm, unassuming, yet it carried an undeniable Wait. Every adult in the courtroom seemed to hold their breath, captivated by her innocence and clarity. The prosecutor stepped forward, addressing the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, you have now witnessed an extraordinary event. A young witness has provided detailed, accurate testimony, corroborated by video evidence, behavioral analysis of a police, K-9, and now the direct recovery of stolen property. The facts are clear. We ask you to consider the credibility, courage, and consistency of this witness in your deliberations. The jurors leaned forward, some scribbling notes, others exchanging glances that spoke volumes. Months of careful investigation had led them to this moment, but nothing had prepared them for the clarity a child could bring to a case. Officer Daniels, standing beside his K-9, looked pale. The dog's behavior had confirmed Emily's account. Subtly hesitant, yet precise in its alignment with the events. Daniels had trained the animal for years, yet a child's memory had outshone months of adult oversight. For the first time, he understood the gravity of what a small, observant voice could accomplish. The defense attorney, flushed and frustrated, attempted one last objection. Your Honor, this is completely unprecedented. A toddler cannot be relied upon for legal testimony. The recovered items, who is to say she remembered or guessed? This is speculation and fantasy. The judge raised a hand, calm but firm, overruled. The evidence is clear. The testimony, the K-9's behavior, and the recovered items form a coherent, verifiable narrative. The court recognizes the unusual circumstances, but the facts speak for themselves. Emily, seemingly oblivious to the legal wrangling around her, hugged her bear and looked at the recovered bag. She blinked once, her finger pointing toward the German shepherd. He helped, she whispered softly. The courtroom went silent. Her words were so simple, only 2 words, yet the power behind them resonated through the room. He helped. The entire K-9 unit, trained for obedience, had indeed assisted the man. The child's 2 words captured the essence of what no adult had articulated before: acknowledgement of the dog's involvement in the crime scene. The jurors shifted, the weight of the moment settling upon them. Months of investigation, countless adult testimonies, and careful preparation had been rendered secondary to the clarity of Emily's observation. Her simple declaration carried more truth than any previous witness had managed to convey. The prosecutor, recognizing the emotional significance, addressed the court again. Ladies and gentlemen, the witness has spoken plainly, without coaching, without hesitation. Her words have guided law enforcement, confirmed evidence, and provided clarity where there was none. This is justice illuminated by truth, spoken. In 2 words, he helped. Outside the courtroom, reporters whispered eagerly into their microphones, scribbling notes frantically. Social media buzzed with the story. Toddler's 2 words solve break-in. 3-year-old points out police dog, leads to stolen evidence. The story was unprecedented, captivating the nation's attention. Back inside, Emily's mother kissed her forehead. You're amazing, baby, she whispered. You helped everyone see the truth. Emily smiled faintly, hugging her bear tighter. I just told what I saw, she said. Her voice was calm, devoid of pride or pretense, only honesty. The judge cleared his throat, bringing the courtroom back to order. The court acknowledges the significance of this testimony and the recovered evidence. It is clear that the child's observations were critical in clarifying the facts. This case exemplifies the principle that even the smallest voice can illuminate truth and justice. Officer Daniels lowered his head, releasing a slow breath. He glanced down at his K-9, who now sat obediently, but with subtle alertness, ears flicking once more toward the child. The dog's behavior, once meticulously controlled, had provided confirmation of events that had been hidden from view. Daniels now understood that training alone could not account for memory, awareness, and instinct, especially when a child's testimony highlighted details he had overlooked. The jurors, witnessing the extraordinary sequence, prepared for deliberation. They understood that months of investigation had been guided, refined, and ultimately confirmed by a 3-year-old child's memory. Her courage had surpassed expectation. Her clarity had illuminated the truth. And her 2 words, so simple, so precise, had changed the trajectory of justice. The defense attorney, though still protesting, could do little. The narrative was clear, the evidence aligned, and the child's testimony corroborated. He recognized, reluctantly, that his strategy had been overtaken by the smallest voice in the room. Emily's mother whispered once more, squeezing her daughter's hand. "You helped people today, sweetheart. You helped them find the truth." Emily tilted her head, looking at the K9, then at the recovered bag. "I saw it," she said softly. "I told." The prosecutor, addressing the court one final time, said, "Let this serve as a reminder. Truth can come from anyone, at any age. We often underestimate the smallest voices. But justice, at its core, relies on honesty, observation, and courage. Today, we have witnessed that truth in its purest form." The courtroom erupted in quiet murmurs of acknowledgement. Jurors, witnesses, and spectators shared glances of disbelief and awe. A toddler had spoken, and the world, at least this courtroom, had listened. Outside, media crews captured Emily smiling at her mother, her bear clutched tightly. The story was extraordinary. Headlines would later read, "3-year-old toddler leads police to stolen evidence. Child witness changes trial with 2 words." The nation marveled at how clarity, innocence, and observation could illuminate truths that even professionals had overlooked. Officer Daniels, standing beside his dog, took a deep breath. He had trained the animal for obedience, for discipline, for loyalty. But today he had learned that sometimes instinct, combined with the observation of a child, could reveal truths no training could predict. He knelt beside the German shepherd, giving a quiet pat on the head, acknowledging both the dog's role and the extraordinary events that had unfolded. The judge called the courtroom to order one final time. Let the record reflect the extraordinary contributions of this young witness. Her courage, her clarity, and her observations have proven invaluable. This court is adjourned, pending deliberation and further proceedings as necessary. Emily hugged her mother tightly, unaware of the magnitude of her role. She had simply spoken the truth, observed carefully, and expressed it in 2 words. He helped. The courtroom emptied slowly, spectators buzzing with conversation, journalists scribbling feverishly, and jurors whispering in awe. Yet in the center of it all, Emily remained calm, clutching her bear, small but monumental in her impact. Months of investigation, years of training, and countless adult assumptions had culminated in one simple truth. Justice could be illuminated by the clearest, most unexpected voices. And as the sun began to set outside the courthouse, one thing was undeniable. A 3-year-old girl had changed the course of a trial with courage, clarity, and 2 simple words. The K9, once thought to be an impartial participant, had become a silent witness. And the courtroom, forever altered by this tiny witness, had witnessed history. Emily, holding her bear, smiled faintly at her mother. She had done nothing extraordinary, yet everything had changed. In that moment, the truth had prevailed, and justice had been served. All because someone had been brave enough to speak. It, no matter their age. The story would be remembered for years. The day a toddler pointed at a police dog, uttered 2 words, and changed everything.